Hi everyone! Welcome to our new webinar. We are talking now about appraisal. I'm sure you already seen me before, maybe or maybe not. Let's get acquainted too. And my host today is Tainá Baylão, right? So we will be talking about the Brazil's LGPD. It's like a GDPR, but in Brazil. And we will talk about 10 key privacy points and questions that will always make us very interested in another country. So let's start.
Yeah. Can we start?
Okay. So we are having this our agenda. Right. Up. Here it is. Yes. So there are the 10 key points that we have to discuss today, and I will really hope and really thank Tainá that she is right now with us, and she will be actually contributing to this webinar in a very, very precious point. She will be telling us about working as a DPO in Brazil. So let's introduce a little bit. I'm waiting for your introduction in the chat and comment sections. Of course, write us the questions that you have, and I will be happy to answer them myself or ask our guest to answer them, mostly, of course. And this is my photo. I am Katrina Dubas. I'm working in Legal IT Group as a head of privacy here. We are lawyers. Our headquarters is in Kyiv, Ukraine, and we are actually dealing a lot with privacy issues. So we started the cycle about the privacy take points, that we can contribute the knowledge, that we can exchange the knowledge, and of course that we can tell more about the privacy all around the world. And we have our guest today too. It's Tainá Baylão, right? Could you please introduce or tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello everyone, my name is Tainá. I'm a lawyer here in Brazil, and I'm specialized in privacy and data protection. I graduated law school about 3 years ago, so not so long, in 2019. And I hadn't had any contact with privacy since then, because we don't have privacy as in our curriculum here in Brazil due to its novelty. So I started an LLM in a German University of Göttingen in 2020, and there I learned all the fundamentals to the GDPR. Then last year in 2021, I got hired by an Irish consultancy as a data privacy analyst. And 99% of our clients there were European or American. So I had the opportunity to put in place GDPR and the CCPA as well. In my day-to-day, I act as a DPO for many software service companies and startups. We mapped the company's data, provided them with gap analysis, help creating policies and procedures, as well as answer data subject requests. Basically, any queries related to privacy. Right now, I'm a data privacy lawyer at Peck Advogados here in Brazil, and I'm more focused on governance and DPO as a service. And all our clients now are dealing with LGPD or GDPR. There, I also have the opportunity to face more complicated issues, and I am more involved with day-to-day of our clients, since they're usually large corporations with much more complex matters.
Oh, great. Thank you for this detailed introduction. It's really actually quite help that you are giving us by participating. I know that it's clearly really early in the morning where do you live, and it's quite interesting that you decided to spare some sleep and help us out to tell us a little bit more about the Brazil and LGBT. So thank you very much for participating. We are so happy to have you here today. Yeah. So let's start. We discussed your introduction, your bio, your educational background too, but actually what do you do right now as part of Peck Advogados? What's your experience in personal data protection right now? What are you dealing with daily, and so on and so on? What is your key job tasks, for example?
Yeah, for sure. Right now, much what I do is governance, so writing policies and procedures, DPIAs, legitimate interest assessments, data subject requests. We also deal with many day-to-day analysis of data processing of our clients, and we tell them you should go this way or you should go that way, and we help them apply privacy by design and privacy by default in all of their products and services. Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, daily working with privacy it can be. But what drives you in the privacy industry? How did you learn about this area of laws at all? And why do you think that it's interesting enough to participate in it and build a career in privacy?
Yeah, for me, it's two main reasons. First, I love challenges and solving puzzles. And since privacy is such a new legislation, you get the hardest questions because we still don't have answers for it. We still don't have court decisions, and the legislation is not that comprehensive yet. So there's a lot of lacunes that we need to interpretate. So it's very challenging and fun. And also it's because I love the relation between law and technology. And I'm also very keen to innovative projects. So helping a developer create a new technological solution while using privacy by design by default, helping them from the day they start thinking about their process until the product is done. It's something else entirely from any other field in the law.
I agree, actually. Mostly it's the reason why I decided to pursue a career here too, and I can understand you quite well. And I think that our listeners who also work in the privacy area can actually agree with us, and that's great. I'm so happy to have so many privacy geeks here. So let's move to Brazil. What is the main privacy act? Are there other related laws, and are there any local laws? We know that Brazil is a federation, am I right?
Yes, Brazil is a federation just like the United States. And our main privacy act, as you mentioned earlier, is the LGPD, which is our General Data Protection Law. We have the law since 2018, but it only entered into force in August of 2020. So companies would have some time to adapt to the new requirements of the law. But it was not the entire law that entered in effect on 2020. The enforcement and the penalties only entered in force last year in August 1st of 2021. So since it's so new, it's like 7 months ago, everyone is still adapting. But as of now, the LGPD is the only exclusively data protection legislation in Brazil. On the other hand, depending on the topic being discussed, we have other legislations that may come in and be important to your analysis of a subject. For example, labor laws, financial laws, consumer laws, or health laws. They can all impact on data protection. Usually they serve as benchmarks for data retention periods or even standards for data protection itself. For example, if a company is wondering if they can monitor their employees' corporate emails, they should check LGPD and CLT. CLT is our federal labor law. Also, since there are not many court decisions related to LGPD yet, probably you'll find this answer in a labor court. So if you're wondering what the answer to this question actually is, yes, in Brazil, you are allowed to monitor your employees' corporate emails as long as you are transparent with them and make it very clear through company policies. that they're going to be subject to monitoring. And yes, you can find that in a labor court decision, not LGPD yet.
It's actually very interesting because in Ukraine, as a part of Council of Europe, as you may heard, we're actually quite bound by, our hands are bound by the actually case law of the European Court of Human Rights, where it is discussed that there are some limits imposed on the employee monitoring and reading their emails and actually monitoring their workplace and so on and so on. And it's quite an interesting point because, well, it's quite hard to find for example, a provision in our Ukrainian labor codes that will say that yes, you can monitor it however you want, because we have this prevailing corpus of European Court of Human Rights case law, so we have to obey it too. And it's interesting because, well, yes, LGPD is like a big thing, a big act that has to be actually encompassing privacy matters in general, but there are, of course, some other laws that shall be actually regarded to. Should we go to the next question?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So what is connection between the LGPD and the GDPR? For example, could you list the prominent differences that you can see right now, for example, or that they are mostly similar in their approach, in their appliance, in their compliance practices, and you just have to make some slight adjustments, for example?
Yeah, so the LGPD was entirely based on the GDPR, therefore there are many similarities, more similarities than differences. For example, the principles, they're basically the same. For example, purpose, limitation, or accuracy, we also have that, transparency, accountability. Yeah, they're basically the same. So when the principles are the same, usually the legislation follows in the same way. But yeah, another similarity is that the LGPD has also an extraterritorial scope. This being that even companies that are not established in Brazil can be subject to its application if they are offering goods or services to individuals located within the Brazilian territory, or if the company is processing data of individuals located within the Brazilian territory. And on this note, it's also important to mention that Brazil still haven't been given an adequacy decision by the European Commission. So if your company is planning to offer goods and services to people located in Brazilian territory, probably there will be some international transfers involved. And in this case, since we don't have an adequacy decision, the company should look for additional safeguards to these transfers, like the STCs or abiding corporate rules. On the same note, with similarities, both legislations aim to prevent instead of remediating. So we have privacy by design, we also have privacy by default, and they're important factors within our governance project. About the differences, the GDPR is more comprehensive, while the LGPD stipulates that our national authority at INPDs will be in charge of regulating and providing guidance where the law went silent. And yes, there were a lot of points where the law went silent. For example, regarding international transfers, regarding the DPIA, everything is still pending of further regulation by the INPD. Meanwhile, the GDPR already has all those concepts in the law itself.
So you mentioned CCPA earlier, that we were working with it, and we saw that on the website that you were working with it too. So are there any limitations in the LGPD that would actually look like the CCPA ones? For example, limitations on who can be who have to comply with LGPD, for example.
Yeah, usually we don't even look to CCPA here in Brazil, because it's very different from our legislation. I think the CCPA lacks a lot because it's very basic. It's almost a consumer law. In the main point of difference between both legislations would be that CCPA has a specific topic on selling data. But if you interpret most of LGPD's principles, in 80% of the situations, you cannot sell data, even though we don't have a specific instrument saying that in the law, you know.
Back to Brazil. Is privacy and data protection recognized as constitutional rights?
Yeah, so I was going to mention that later in our chat, but I just can't anticipate that. Yeah, we are having actually today an constitutional amendment to include data privacy as a fundamental right here in Brazil. It's happening today, so it's very new to us. Like, we had privacy as an important right before, but not as a fundamental right.
So, well, congratulations on this achievement, actually. I'm so happy to hear that, because, of course, here in Europe we lack some recognizedness, so our privacy is valuable.
Yeah, I remember something else. In GDPR, we only have 3 specific situations where you should assign a DPO for your company. Here in Brazil, the law says that every company should have a DPO. We had very recently a new regulation regarding smaller companies, and then they are exception to that. But overall, every company should have a DPO. It's not like the GDPR. It's not in some occasions. You have to think about every occasion.
Okay, I get it. Thank you. And I have one question left in this section. Are cookies, email marketing practices, and location data also regulated by LGPD?
INPD's main activities are overseeing companies, including audits, applying sanctions to controllers and processors, also sub-processors, that disrespect the LGPD. They're also in charge of promoting awareness about this legislation and public policies related to privacy and information security. They also evaluate data subjects' complaints about controllers and processors, and they issue regulations, guidance, and procedures into privacy and data protection. Like I said, the law is still is not that comprehensive, so there's much left to be regulated. We need much more guidance, and INPD is always issuing new guidances, regulations, and procedures. And also,
Yes.
INPD is the main data protection regulator in Brazil. So not respecting LGPD or their recommendations could result in formal warning indicating a deadline to fulfill corrective measures. That's the least worst one. They can also publicize the infraction in the media outlets, which would be very bad for the company's reputation. They can block personal data related to the infraction. They can eliminate personal data related to the infraction. They can suspend processing of personal data related to the infraction. And the worst ones are the fines. They can go up to 2% of the company's revenue, limited to 50 million reais per infraction. But the worst one, which is partial or total prohibition of processing any personal data. So,
well, 50 million sounds like a lot.
A maximum level, yeah. You wouldn't want that.
I bet. So, is agency operating? Last time I checked, they were still hiring. Are they working right now?
Yes, they are already working, but they're actually looking for a building right now. Everything is done remotely.
Well, yeah, COVID implications, I guess.
Yeah, and they're looking for a physical location, but they're pretty new. You're correct.
I wish you good luck to finding that place, of course. And it's important to have some physical place where you can collect all these emails and all those paper letters with descriptions of violations of LGPD too. So if I have a business, should I register with the INPD?
Oh, no, not necessary. You can start collecting data as long as you're correctly as long as you're following LGPD, you don't have to register with them. But it's good to have a registration of your DPO with them, just in case there is a data breach incident, because you have to notify them by 72 hours, and to actually register to the website, it can take up to 2 days. So if you start the registration process after the data breach already happened, you may not have enough time to get done with the registration and notifying them.
Okay. But who should you report to? Are there any local supervisory authorities, like not a federal one, but maybe a smaller local authorities that you can refer to and ask them for help? Or there is an NPD only?
No, it's only NPD as the federal authority. We don't have any local ones.
And any other agency, either federal or local, actually applies LGPD and fine under the LGPD?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the enforcement and fines of the LGPD only came into force in August 1st, merely 6 months ago. And within this short period, no company has been fined up until now. The main reason for that is because ANPD still hasn't issued a regulation regarding the methodology to apply the sanctions. So they cannot sanction anyone until they have the methodology. But to remediate this issue, ANPD is going to apply sanctions with retroactive effect to those who are not in compliance with the LGPD. Therefore, for example, if a data breach incident happens in your company after August 1st of 2021, you can be fined for that, even if it's in 2022 or 2023. But we are expecting that the fines will start this year. But yeah, there's a lot of cases that are already being investigated by the authority. But even though we don't have a local data protection authority, LGPD can be enforced by other governmental authorities. For example, PROCON, which is our consumer law authority. They are divided by state. So yeah, you have local authorities in that matter. And last year, they issued a fine of approximately 600,000 reais to a drugstore chain that was collecting clients' personal data and biometry without providing adequate information to the data subjects regarding the processing of those data. The company supposedly was collecting the data to include customers in discount and benefits programs, but later in the investigation, they discovered that the real purpose was to update their database. The problem was that they didn't disclose that to the clients. But yeah, LGPD sanctions can be applied by other governmental authorities, but they're not data protection authorities.
Oh, I see. Here is the point. Okay, so you mentioned there is no guideline on the methodology of investigation of breaches, right? So
yeah.
Therefore, there are no fines so far, as I understood. So, but did the agency issue any other guidelines? Maybe they are covering any other questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of guidelines that are pending, so no one knows how to act yet, so it's a bit of a gray area.
As I heard, there is a guideline on the tasks of DPR, if I'm not mistaken, and there are some other pending guidelines too. What are they addressing?
The most recent ones were guidelines for public authorities, and we also had one on political parties because we're having our first presidential election since the LGPD started this year. We also had the one that you mentioned about controllers and processors, also DPOs, and we had a regulation on small companies now.
Mm-hmm. So small companies, for example, what should small companies do and not do under that guideline?
They mention startups, but usually they mention companies that have a certain limit of profit per year. I don't have the number right now, but I can definitely check it out.
I don't think it is so necessary right now. It's important just to understand that there are some, restrictions are lifted when we are bringing our startup to compliance.
They try to simplify the LGPD for these companies.
GDPR-like style.
Like LGPD Smart.
Smart naming, actually. So, yeah. Okay, and the last question that I have in this section is, did the ANPD issue the standard contractual clauses?
No, we still don't have anything on international transfers. also pending, maybe this year or next year. But yeah, LGBT mentions that to do international transfers, you should have additional safeguards, just like GDPR. But we don't have any details on that yet.
Well, we are waiting. They promised us to issue one, so the thing that we can do now is just wait for them to appear and simplify our life like a great deal. So
yeah, usually we use the SCCs just like the GDPR because that's the only benchmark we have.
Oh, I understand. You will do the same here, actually. So, LGPD was in effect way earlier than actually its effective date. I mean that you had LGPD taken as law in 2018, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But it was in effect since 2020. Right? And I've heard that some companies, but not companies, okay, some organizations that are focused on the data protection and, of course, data subjects could bring actually report violations of LGPD before 2020. Is it right?
Yes.
And how does it work? How should the NPD actually prosecute them? Should they just postpone them before the methodology is issued, or should they investigate them somehow? How does it work?
Yeah, LGPD is investigating companies that, like what is happening a lot right now is that companies are freaking out about LGBT.
I understand.
So, yeah, so a lot of companies are like, oh, a small incident happened. I have to report you to NPDs right away. So there are some situations that they didn't even have to report it. But they go and do it because they're scared of any little and small thing that happens. Then sometimes NPD asks for more information and things get complicated because you didn't even have to report that to begin with. But yeah, we also have a lot of data subjects reporting companies for not answering them or for not answering them properly.
I understand.
Usually that's the base for their investigations.
Well, what can we do? Prepare and wait, I guess, in this point area, and consult our clients to be in compliance too. And let's move to the data subject access request. Have you an experience dealing with them as actually under the LGPD?
So there's a few differences regarding data subject requests here in Brazil. Here, the controller should be aware that the deadline to attend those data subject requests are only 15 days, counting weekends and holidays. It's not like in Europe that is a month. And they usually the law says that the starting date for this deadline is the date that the data subject sends the request. But in our interpretation, in our law firm, and most good practices is that the deadline should start from the day you confirm the identity of the data subject, because this is paramount to avoid any data protection incidents of any social engineering techniques. So we only start counting the 15 days after the person confirmed that they are the actual person making the request. And about that new legislation I mentioned, the regulation about small companies, they give these small companies 30 days to address data subject requests, but the general rule is 15 days.
It's quite quick, I have to admit. So you're working as a DPO, right?
Yeah.
How often do you receive such requests?
Not that often. And also it depends of the type of business. I had a client once that they were a big gym, and they get requests very often. Very, very often, because they have too many data subjects and the type of their activity, and that's why you get many requests. But usually for companies that only do B2C, no, sorry, B2B and industries and the likes, we don't get that much data subject requests. Mostly they come from employees themselves, not from clients, for example.
How do you work with them? I mean, do you receive them from a contact point from the company client, or do you deal with them yourself? You have the access to the email, for example, and you are the first person who reads them and works with them.
Depends on the client. There are clients that prefer that we have direct access to the mailbox, and there are clients that they have access to the mailbox and they only contact us when it's something more complex, because we did give them training on how to address those requests. So, and they don't want to spend hours with us for nothing. So they only contact when it's a major problem or something that they don't know how to handle.
All right, I can understand.
It's really up to the client.
And how you personally prefer it? To deal with it yourself, or just to receive the first message from the employee of the company that you are working with?
Usually when we have access to the mailboxes, we have a company email from that company. But sometimes they just redirect to our corporate emails from the law firm. It really depends.
It makes sense. Sometimes you want to see them for the first person and know what to do and how to instruct the persons to help you. And sometimes it's quite easier just to receive a text and prepare an answer. I understand you, yes. So,
true.
So, we were talking about the DPO duties. And what is the DPO role under the LGPD? And what are the main challenges for you as a professional in this area?
As the main challenge, I would have to say awareness, because in Europe, privacy has been discussed since the proclamation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That was 1948. And then you had the Charter of Fundamental Rights in 2000, and then Convention 108, and then the Directive 9546 in the 90s. So the GDPR is only the combined result of all these discussions over the years. It's not novelty to Europeans. Most of them are well aware of their privacy rights. For example, Mark Schrems, his work has led to the cancellation of the Safe Harbor Agreement and then the privacy shield between the US and the European Union.
Twice.
But here in Brazil, before LGPD, no one has any idea, any clue about data privacy or privacy rights. We usually trust too much here in Brazil, I would say. And people are not trained to detect social engineering techniques. They often fail to detect phishing emails. So it's usually the small things, like big things like contracts that have NDAs, and then maybe you insert privacy clauses. People get that. But when you come to their day-to-day, like, don't leave your password in a post-it glued to your computer, or don't share your password with your friend.
Yes, yes. Or Coworker when you're absent, yes.
Exactly. It's just the small things that usually people will take a little longer to
accommodate.
To internalize, you know? But
yes.
It's a cultural thing. I know that privacy is novelty to us, but Brazilians are great to adapt. I'm sure we'll pick it up in no time.
Well, the same here in Ukraine actually, because of course you have to work with computer on your job, and sometimes you're absent and there's an urgent email that someone has to answer to, and you just mailing or just writing in the Telegram and any other social media apps like, oh, here is my password, please answer that email for me. And it was like, what? It's strictly against this training, security training that we are giving you. Why are you acting like that?
Yeah, here in Brazil it's also very common that we save everything in our desktops, and sometimes we fail to upload that in the cloud, so that can be a problem, because sometimes the data sphere request can come and say, I want you to eliminate all the data you have about me, and then like every department has a copy of that document on their desktop. If you go to legal, they have one. If you go to compliance, they will have one. If you go to sales and marketing, they will all have the same document in their desktops. So if they only had one document in the cloud, it would be much easier to just erase it. But yeah.
I understand you completely, because it's always such an issue to say that, oh guys, you should keep all the data in one place, and so you can do better with your data subject requests. And but they're like, why would we need that? We need someone to work with that, so I'll send it to him or her via the WhatsApp or Telegram, and it's like absolutely against the training that you give usually. And okay. So, back to DPO tasks. Can a DPO under the Brazilian law actually be active and participate in decision making, like decide how to enforce disciplinary, for example, actions against the employees that were distributing their secure passwords around the team, or so on? Can you be included in the decision making?
Yeah, usually DPOs are a support role. They're not meant to be decision makers. They are there just to advise. We also don't like to create conflict of interest. So we advise our clients, for example, to not choose as the DPO the head of HR or the head of marketing. These areas, they deal with a lot of data, personal data, and they have interests in their data being pushed through. So it wouldn't be good to give that amount of power to them. But yeah, we try to avoid those areas, and we always make clear to our clients that the DPO doesn't make the decisions. He only supports it. We also recommend to create a committee with the top members of each area, so they can vote on every decision and then lift the weight from the DPO of deciding anything.
Well, it's quite a smart move to distribute actually the tasks, because sometimes there are some seasons and some days that you are just overwhelmed with your job, with that subject request numbers and the work that has been done, especially near the new year, where the new regulation takes place. And of course, I understand that it's quite a hard task actually to achieve and to monitor and maintain the compliance. For example, when you are appointing a DPO, should you register it with the INPD? Should you communicate the details that here our person is, our man or woman is actually playing the role of the DPO in our company?
Yeah. Sorry, what was the last thing you said?
Should you actually tell the INPD, the supervisory authority, that you are appointing a DPO, and communicate his or her details and name and maybe some background information?
Usually to confirm someone's identity, we ask for a document like their driver's license or their social security number, something like that.
I was meaning it's something else. For example, in Europe, before the GDPR took place, it was a responsibility of a controller to communicate that we have such person who is actually our DPO and who is responsible for privacy and data protection organization. Now, after the GDPR took place, there are some actually obligations imposed on controllers that you have to correspond with the supervisory authority, and you have to notify them of your appointment of a specific person as a DPO. Is there an obligation that is similar to this actually commitment in the LGPD?
No, even though you have to have a DPO and you have to put their contact details on your website, for example, you don't even need to put the name of the DPO there. You just need to put their information. And also it doesn't need to be a natural person. It can be a legal person. For example, when we are DPOs for a company, we are the law firm is the DPO. It's not us lawyers as natural persons. It's the company, like Peck Advogados itself. But no, you don't need to register that with the NPDs. You only need to be registered if you're going to notify NPD of something. For example, data breach incident.
Well, seems legit actually. You have to know what you are talking to actually, and to maybe identify yourself to communicate and represent the company, especially in such sensitive topics and sensitive issues too. Okay, so we have talked about the small and medium-sized enterprises, that they have some smart LGPD guideline took in place that they can spare their resources and their workforce on complying with some complicated LGPD issues, for example, records of processing activities and so on. So we were talking that there are some applications that are lifted, but we are working on compliance with small and medium-sized enterprises. Do they have to appoint a DPO?
I think, sorry, I just read it a few weeks ago, and it was just like, they released it 2 weeks ago. But if I'm not mistaken, no, for the small companies, the obligation of having a DPO is lifted.
Oh, great news, I guess. For small companies, especially because they are sometimes very reluctant to impose this burden on one of their employees to work on the data protection and monitor the compliance with it too. So yes, I guess it's a relief. But we are now on the 10th question. Any trends or predictions in Brazil's privacy regulations for 2022? Are there any trends?
So according to an INPD's calendar for these years, we should have the regulation about fines, finally, about communication of incidents and deadline for notification, and a very weighted one is the regulation on data protection impact assessments. Because here in Brazil, even though the law mentions it, it doesn't bring mandatory situations where you have to do it. So we usually do as the GDPR say, and for any situation that we think that might present a risk. But we don't have a regulation on that up until now. We're also going to have the election, like I mentioned. So we'll see in practice how this legislation is going to work for the parties and the politicians. It's kind of complicated because the presidential run, it only happens for a few months. So imagine that will be such a challenge to nominate, like to give a DPO's name and then do a records of processing activity and all those requirements from the LGPD for something that's only gonna work for 2 or 3 months. So we have to see how this is gonna work.
Sounds like a lot of work for DPOs, especially for those who are working with political parties, because of their marketing activity, because of their promotion of this political party and this maybe targeted advertising that will be actually used too. So yes, I guess it's quite a challenge that is waiting. Any other trends? So we are waiting for standard contractual clauses. We are waiting for new guidelines too, and your wish or prediction, from your personal experience, like a professional for 2022.
I'm hoping to see something on international transfers because of the Google Analytics decisions in Europe by the Austrian DPA and the Norwegian DPA. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Maybe something related to cookies. I don't know.
Yes, we are waiting for those too. There is going to be a reform of our Ukrainian privacy laws, and we are waiting for it because we have some bills registered but not yet heard in the parliament. So, well, yes, it's going to be interesting. So, I don't see any questions in chat, so we can then proceed. And we'll leave our listeners a couple of seconds to ask us something, so we can talk with them a little bit longer. But in the meanwhile, I wanted to thank you for your help and for your expertise that you shared. I wanted to thank you that you spent this hour talking with us about the LGPD and what is going on in Brazil. And of course, wish you good luck with your DPO duties, with your privacy career, and with your academic interests too. And I really hope, that we will host even more different events that are focused on privacy with you too.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you very much. There were, of course, some technical issues that were not in our favor. But I hope that not all the news and not all the surprise and not all the delight will spoil it for our listeners. Of course, we will maybe do some edits just to adjust it for the listening and watching. And in the meanwhile, you can see the contacts of our company, Legality Group, and of course, Peck Advogados that Tainá works for. And please share us. Maybe write new comments, write us your questions. We will distribute them, we will send them to Tainá so she can help you with answers. And of course, thank you for listening, thank you for being with us, and hope to see you next time too. See ya.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
Bye.